It's that time of day again, Sunday, 6 p.m. Welcome to Steve's Place. And we're having an exciting show tonight. We have Tom Valone, who's going to do his presentation on some of the history of integrity research and their fight against the federal government, who actually fired Tom when he was a patent thing because he was promoting well, some scientific facts that were kind of in dispute. Anyway, we're going to see how to handle that and everything. In the meantime, I'd like to remind everyone, we have our upcoming conference, we have our conference on free energy and everything coming up, in August. And I'd like to remind everyone to be sure to show up for that. And it's going to be August 7th to 11th in 2024 in Albuquerque, most likely at the Crown Plaza. They are great at hosting our meeting and everything. And I'm sure everyone who comes will have a great time. Right now, we have discounts going on. I believe it's 40% right now. So if you want to get in at a bargain price, now's the time to do it. Plan ahead and you get great rates on transportation too. In the meantime, I'm putting out a call for people, encouraging everyone to come to the conference. I just can't emphasize it more, that people need to be there. And I believe conferences are for people. They're about people in that. You learn from people. You don't learn from a screen in that. Yeah, it may help you get information, specific information by on a screen of that. But basically, most of that's just to serve as a reminder. The main way of transferring energy is from human to human. Right now, they're having some studies. They're having real problems in school right now because kids are not motivated anymore to learn. And I believe that a lot of this has come from the screen stuff. You get too much screen, you don't really learn anything. You don't learn how to deal with people and that. You can't tell if people are just yanking your chain or whatever unless you're there in person. So I encourage everyone to come to the conference, and I encourage every speaker who has something to show, at least get in contact with us, and we'll see if we can't get you on the stage, especially if you have hardware. We promote hardware over hardware any day of the week, And finally, I'd like to suggest that everyone get on our YouTube channel. This thing is classic. I mean, I can't say enough about our YouTube channel. It's a good way for people to get on the information that they can't find anywhere else. I have over 1,000 presentations at this point of time, and more coming every day. I can't tell you enough how important it is for people to get on our YouTube channel. It helps us sustain ourselves, but even more important, it helps us get other people interested in this field. Now, we're a dying breed here. Researchers that can go out here and look at the world in a different manner. We need to have researchers out there. And maybe if you see something these old timers did at Global Science or Exotic Research or the Conference of Free Energy, maybe you might get an inspiration. A lot of things have changed since then. For those who don't know how to get to it, just go to testdetect.info, just like our alien guy did, and there'll be a big yellow box there. You click on that, it takes you right to the Test channel. Or you can use the conference directory, speaker directory, if you know exactly what you need to get. So come on down and go to our Test channel, subscribe. Once you get up there, subscribe. That way, and make sure you hit the notify button. Because that way you can let people, you let the searchers know what's popular in that, and helps let other people know how to find us in that. So it's important to, and subscriptions are free. And there's a couple hundred videos up there you can see for free, but there's well over 1,000. We're starting to head towards 2,000 videos up there. We cover all the Tesla Tech videos. Now we're working on the global science videos, and we'll have the COFE videos up there too as well. And eventually the International Tesla Society conferences from way back when. So yeah, join. It's $9.99 to join. Well, to get the exclusive member option, it's $9.99. Make sure you use the $9.99 option to get to see all the videos. The other one's more like a little donation thing. So anyway, if y'all get a chance, get up there and sign up. And I want to remind you again, our conference is going to be August 7th to 11th. I can't stress that enough. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tom Valone from the Integrity Research. And there you go, Tom. So welcome to Steve's place.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Been here a couple of times, but tonight you're going to tell us all about the history of integrity research, I imagine.
Absolutely.
And all the backroom secrets, and your fights, which I remember well. In fact, I'm thinking I might have went to that conference. I think I went to that conference, and he had it in Bethesda, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun time. But with that, I'm just going to let you just go ahead and get into it, okay?
Okay. Sounds good. And my volume is sufficient for everyone to hear? I hope so. Okay. What we're basically talking about today is the first quarter century. In a couple of weeks, we'll be into 2024. And this is essentially 25 years ago that we started with the public life of integrity research, and also my public life as well. Today, for example, in 2023, you see the exhibit booth that recently we manned, Jackie and I, essentially showing all the different products and publications, and even our energy chair in the back of on the right side of me, left side from your perspective. And so it's interesting that exhibit booths certainly are helpful to communicate to the public. Well, when we look back, though, historically, my public life and also Integrity Research Institute's public life began in 1999. I was invited to hold a conference on free energy at the State Department's Open Forum. And the State Department has and still does have the Open Forum that was established during the Vietnam era for presentations that were counter to the administrative point of view. That's literally how the description of the Open Forum reads. And essentially, when I tried to align myself with that, after I received the invitation from the director of the Open Forum that I knew, who works directly under the Secretary of State, she basically then started to notice that more and more government agencies were finding out about this, and also the American Physical Society specifically was reacting to it. At the time, there was a professor, Bob Park, who was a public affairs official for the American Physical Society. And he was essentially the most critical person that was involved in the following or the description of, or however you want to describe the reaction to my conference. And essentially, we changed it to Conference on Future Energy immediately. And also, within a few months, I was fired and had to wait 6 years before I gained my job back. But as you see, even by 2007, this is a reprint of one of the pages of a Make magazine article. MAKE is the name of the magazine. And it's dealing with people that are do-it-yourselfers. And yet, unfortunately, I had another critical reporter going ahead and calling the stuff that I'm interested in that science is considered to be junk. So my reputation keeps following me. But to describe more of the details of this conference, essentially at the Patent Office, after 3 years being there, I realized we basically are, as examiners, trying to make decisions about emerging new technologies from paper, literally paper that comes across your desk, and you essentially try to look on the internet to see if anything similar has been patented or published. Both are bad news for the applicant. And essentially, I realized we don't have any real world experience or contact at all. And very rarely does the inventor ever come to the office. And even more rarely do we ever get to hear a presentation describing any technology. So I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great to have a conference at the State Department? And that was literally my first following on the invitation. But even after I received some backlash there, I tried to have it at the Commerce Department. And that's where I work, so that's where I was told, hey, you can use the auditorium for free. So here's a slide just showing the beginning of an 80-page arbitration decision that was done in 2005. And essentially, the first paragraph started off with the cold fusion controversy. Well, the reason why the arbitrator chose that as the first paragraph was because my conference is being called a cold fusion conference. And it was weird because back 25 years ago, this was a real controversial subject. In fact, as we see here, the possibility of cold fusion was an acceptable scientific topic. However, it received a setback in 1989 with Franz and Fleischmann's test that couldn't be replicated. So essentially, that became an issue immediately. And as the quote below that shows on the slide, I indicated the interest in reserving space at the department for the conference room and so forth. And I also posted information about it on the internet. Excuse me. And that was essentially enough to incriminate me for a conflict of interest and misrepresentation. Well, as the hammering kept going on from Bob Park in his What's New column every week, apparently everybody in the government subscribed to this because it was from, reputable American Physical Society. But unfortunately, it was very biased. And as a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered, it turns out that Park told Zimmerman, who turns out to be the only physicist at the State Department, Pete, if you can't get that killed, what's the point of having you at the State Department? So this is a surprise email that really helped my case a lot to show there was a conspiracy to embarrass the Patent Office and to incriminate me when basically I had nothing bad that I was essentially doing except advocating emerging energy science. And unfortunately, Park did a 1-2 punch by also following up by contacting a reporter at the Science magazine, Science Journal. It's a very reputable journal, as a matter of fact. It's on the level of Nature magazine, it comes out of England. And he wanted this reporter to investigate the Patent Office. And David Voss, a faithful APS member, decides to go ahead with it and basically found nothing to report on my case that was incriminating. However, the report of the Patent Office finding some other patents that I had nothing to do with was enough to embarrass the experts and the people at the Patent Office. So I was faced with the issue, do we still go ahead with the conference since all the speakers were lined up? So I found a hotel nearby, Holiday Inn, and we scheduled it at the Bethesda Holiday Inn. And of course, there was a lot of interest. Even Park showed up to see what the heck we were talking about. So it was strange to have this critical nemesis doing everything he could to damage the conference and then still show up with curiosity about what we're actually going to be talking about and discussing. So anyways, you can see here the title of Nature magazine U.S. State Department gets cold feet on cold fusion. And that's exactly the image that all of the media presented, that this was a free energy conference, a cold fusion conference, and pseudoscience. So now in the picture here in the middle is Paul Brown getting the Integrity and Research Award for the first time, which we continued for every conference after that. And Paul Brown, as I'll describe later, was the discoverer of a new type of tritium nuclear battery, which has been replicated now a few times at different places. The CD proceedings, which we produced, actually were quite unique at that time, because not only did they have all the papers, but also the audio tracks of all the presenters. So I was pleased to see that we packed everything onto a CD, which I'll show you in a second. There's also on another medium, and it's available. So some of the notable speakers were Ken Shoulders, besides Paul Brown, and Dr. Storms, he was the only cold fusion presenter at the conference. David Goodwin from the DOE, who I'll talk about in a few minutes, and also Dr. Tom Van Flandern, who actually was quite unique in a way, because his expertise was in the area of the speed of gravity. And this was exciting to me because he literally proved that the gravity wave, if you can call it that, it's the communication between, say, the moon and the earth, has to occur at times that are much faster than the speed of light. So you have almost instantaneous communication during an eclipse, for example, when one body of astronomical body is blocking the gravitational force of, say, the sun. Why doesn't the Earth reverberate and change its orbit? Well, it's because it penetrates very quickly, and there's an update very fast, and that's what Dr. Van Flandern was presenting. So what's interesting, too, is that Ken Shoulders, this was the first presentation he had given at a conference, as far as I knew, and his expertise was in charge clusters. Well, the charge cluster itself is intriguing because it's micron-sized clusters of electrons. And since then, it's been called a kiloelectron. You can see that in the literature if you want. And what's fascinating, and still is to me today, you might try to reproduce his book on the subject, is that these charge clusters can penetrate almost anything and produce a hole in the most robust type of metal or any substance you can think of. So it became a military interest, which not only Ken Shoulders promoted, but also Hal Puthoff, who's a famous physicist. So the two of them went around to different offices, including DARPA. And what happened after their promotion was, if you ever seen the book called The Field by McTaggart, she essentially says that it was number 3 on the National Critical Issues list that DARPA published after stealth bombers and optical communications. And then it was even condensed to move up to slot number 2. So the Interagency Technological Assessment Group was convinced that Hal and Ken Shoulders were onto something important for the national interest in aerospace to develop it further if the energy could be extracted from the vacuum. And that's exactly what Ken and Hal talked about, is that charge clusters seem to produce and receive and obtain energy from the vacuum to make their impact so robust and so irresistible to anything. So this was a Seminal conference, and here's the list of all the different speakers that we had. We even had Paul Pantone talking about his GEAT project that involved oxygenating the fuel of fossil fuel burners. Dr. Peter Greneau, who actually was interested in the water explosion and chemical bond energy. Even Gene Maloff, the late Gene Maloff from Infinite Energy magazine, gave a slideshow, a private screening of the movie, the produce cold fusion fire from water. And I gave a presentation not only in the beginning, but also later on zero-point energy. David Wallman was interesting too because he showed that a carbon arc underneath the water could actually produce a compound that was usable as a fuel. So we had very fascinating presentations, I thought, and also it became interesting that only 2 years prior to this, there was also New York Times, Science Times, described the physicist who had then just recently confirmed the Casimir effect, which was connected to zero-point energy. And that's the title and the cover of my new book, on zero-point energy, which was reprinted from around 2005, was the first edition. So this had evolved into the thesis that I did after I was fired. I finished my PhD, so it was a blessing in disguise as a way of me going back to school and putting two and two together. The interest in zero-point energy in '99 was put to use and also producing this type of theme of a diode array that could transduce both thermal and non-thermal energy, which is zero-point energy. And some of the Friday presentations, I had two people from the Department of Energy. There's Dr. Storms talking about nuclear reactions, Van Flandern as well, mentioned before. Radiant energy from Bruce Perot was fascinating because he was a component of thorium. And it turns out that I believe China and perhaps Japan are both pursuing thorium reactors that have no radioactive fuel as a byproduct. So we were ahead of the curve in that respect. And this is one of the updated slides I've used previously, describing the tritium beta voltaic batteries that Paul Brown patented and also presented at the conference in '99. And some of the companies, Beta Bat, City Labs, even the University of Wisconsin, discovered the reason for degradation, and they solved it with liquid electrodes. So a tritium battery looks like it's in development as many of these companies continue to work on it. And Ray Kurzweil, who's a futurist, also considers it one of the 10 coolest technologies, which I guess amounts to something to have his endorsement. And of course, the lifespan, 20 to 40-year lifespan, is pretty attractive. And then we had lots of workshops at the first COFE, 3 series of concurrent workshops from 9 to 5. Even Stephen Greer was one of our speakers. So the proceedings listed here describe not only the plenary sessions I described in audio and also papers, but also reviews, the invitation letter from the State Department, my assessment and recollection of how I was fired, all the different articles from the magazines, and also a couple of videos. We had a fascinating presentation by Martin Fleischmann that we threw onto the CD as well, who is the Pons and Fleischmann partner, which developed it, cold fusion. And of course, I had enough notoriety that CNN invited me a couple of years later to be on their CNN Money Line, which I did. And I'm grateful for that exposure and opportunity to talk about, at that time, the demise of fossil fuels and the worry about various other concerns dealing with energy and renewable energy. So as we proceed into 2003, we decided that the centennial of the Wardenclyffe Tower, which was 1903, would essentially be very valuable to celebrate. And what's interesting is that nobody in the world was aware or even interested in celebrating the centennial of the Wardenclyffe Tower. So I not only put together a book, Harnessing the Wheelwork of Nature, Tesla's Science of Energy, and got it published in 2003, but also we held a very nice conference with Tesla experts, including ones on wireless transmission of power, the history of Tesla, and various other chapters that were included in this book. So it's one of the two books I've written on Tesla's technologies, and it's kind of exciting to do. And as we move on to 2006, it turns out that Dr. Jim Hansen from NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies published a 400,000-year map of the Vostok ice core. So this is actual data that he was able to obtain for the sea level, temperature, world temperature, and also the carbon dioxide levels. And you notice that you can see literally 4 ice ages as the temperature, sea level, and carbon dioxide level decreases during the 100,000-year periods. And also noticeable in this graph is the 377 parts per million, exceeding all the maximum we've ever seen in almost actually more than 500,000 years. So at that time, in 2006, we were already way above, even 40% above CO2 level. And this is online at tinyurl/400,000 years. So I give a lot of credit to Jim Hansen for not only in 1989 presenting this to Congress, warning about hockey stick right angle turn for carbon dioxide, but also the start of the global warming concept. But unfortunately, the same year, ABC News revealed that even years before, American Petroleum Institute was doing just the opposite, making sure that obfuscation and the playbook of advocate and rebuttal would constantly be shown in the media, and the White House under the Bush administration played right along with that. So it was a real battle to talk about anything related to climate change or cold fusion, renewable energy. And luckily, Al Gore really forced his way into public eye by talking about it on his Inconvenient Truth movie. And I was fortunate enough to meet him briefly when his new book came out. And our goals for the Institute kind of expanded beyond that that year in 2006, where we embraced the mission of energy, propulsion, and bioenergetics, and looking for future energy and more than just renewables. So this became a more involved program and different projects that went along with it. So the nonprofit mission was being fulfilled even more directly, especially after I had already been restored in 2005 to the Patent Office, and with some back pay that I could donate to our institute for a tax write-off, of course. So here's the proceedings. We actually published the book form for quite a while, in magazines as well, and here's another book I published briefly, which is out of print now, and also turns out the new book by Wiley, the Nova Sciences, was also using the same title, so it contributed to that book as well. And these are just some of the projects that I'll be mentioning as we go along here: spiral magnetic motor, osteopad bone osteoporosis restore, even the impulsor and so forth. These are all projects that we embraced in the bioenergydevice.org website, and it became more possible, even as Jackie showed up at some of our exhibit booths to help with public relations. So our second International Conference on Future Energy happened in 2006, and this was also, I would say, besides COFE 1, COFE 2 was at the top of my list as far as influential, impressive, breakthrough topics, and really luminary presentations. Dr. Glenn Gordon was there, Dr. Pinto, for example, Dennis Bushnell, the senior scientist from NASA. I was very fortunate to get him as a speaker. George Miley had just retired from the Fusion Research Laboratory of the University of Illinois. And Dr. Solecki from Penn State was also the only conference that she came to where we had her present on bioenergy and various electromedicine devices. Now, the interesting last person I should mention, besides Jim Dunn from NASA, which I should give credit to as well, is the Russ George presentation. Russ George, it turns out, described the possibility in 2006 of using powdered iron powder distributed in the ocean as a source of producing extra algae. And the algae is the plankton blooming, in other words, can grab CO2 on a megaton level. And that's, to me, very exciting. He had lots of trouble and backlash from even Greenpeace regarding this type of disruption of the ocean currents and ocean wildlife. But the interesting thing is, every year afterwards, there became more and more tests of his, what he claimed was a proof that he had already engaged in, that the plankton that would grab the carbon dioxide would then die and pass through the thermocline into the bottom of the ocean. So it literally was a carbon capture method, one of the first ever recommended. And even to this day, it turns out this is still a viable, one of the many viable methods that are being considered for at least megaton CO2 removal. Well, not mentioned on this slide either is the fact that John Thomas was there talking about the Searle device, and from his personal experience, John Thomas may be possibly one of the world's experts. And you see that from his presentation. He fielded every question from his own personal experience and also knew so much history of Searle that it made me think twice about how viable the Searle device could be. And here's Dr. Gordon and Dr. Solecki together after the talk. Well, one of the presentations that he gave, this was the topic nanosecond pulsed electromagnetic therapy. It was recorded and distributed even with our EM pulsar for a while. And now we use the other one that he presented, speaking of your injury, which is a little more personal presentation. But either way, it was exciting to have this type of information from the inventor of the nanosecond pulse therapy that really NASA discovered but never capitalized on until recently. So I give Glenn Gordon a lot of credit for this technology because it relieves inflammation. And that's what we described here in this slide is the latest revision or improvement or upgrade of Dr. Gordon's original invention. And the fact that it had a nanosecond rise time may not mean much to most people. What's a billionth of a second? Well, it's pretty fast. It looks like it goes straight up. Well, the interesting thing is that turns out to be the derivative of the voltage, dV/dt. And what's fascinating is that the reaction, which we find in other bioenergy and also other systems, reacts more favorably to a change in voltage than it does to a slow sinusoidal wave or to an elevated level. And so this is an important, the rapid change is exactly the phenomenon that activates the heat shock protein. And heat shock protein was something I didn't know that much about, and Dr. Gordon called it a chaperone protein, but the fascinating effect, which we've seen personally now whenever you have a bump on the head, a knee, for example, you can name 100 different inflammation-causing traumas that you can use this device nearby within, say, 20 minutes, half hour, and start to reduce and prevent black and blue marks, swellings, any inflammatory response you can name that's normally incapacitating. And that's why Dr. Gordon was involved in the military and also with the emergency room. And that even today we've seen doctors buying multiple units of these impulsors to use in the ER. specifically as a first response. So we're pleased to have this product available to the public, and we've had all kinds of testimonials to its efficacy. Well, Dr. Warden also tried to incorporate the same circuitry into what he called an osteopad. And since he was unable to market this and design it properly, I decided to take that on. And I also knew the history of this invention because the osteoporosis reversal turns out to be the same signal that's also related to calcium transport across the cell membranes. And it essentially is simulating a weight-bearing exercise. And what's fascinating is that it heals bone fractures in half the time. It helps with osteopenia and osteoporosis. And also, we had help from Dr. Manning, who patented an early version of this. Well, I knew the three doctors, Dr. Becker, Bassett, and Pilla, who all three of them, medical doctors, patented this type of invention with a fast rising time and various frequencies that worked on bone fractures. But even when I talked to Dr. Pilla and asked him, well, you knew that it would help people with osteoporosis, and 1 out of 2 people tend to develop some range of osteoporosis as they get older in the United States, how come you didn't market it? And Dr. Pilla says, well, we didn't get funding for it. So that was his excuse not to help half the nation. I was really surprised at that. So, okay, so moving right along on COFE 2, here is, I was surprised to fortunately be connected to one of the actresses in the movie Who Killed the Electric Car. And where we held the conference was right across the parking lot from a movie theater. I mean, how opportunistic could you be, in this regard? So I took advantage of it, found out where to get the large reels of actual film back in those days. We had to go that route, and then rent the movie theater for one showing, one screening, as we call it. And Chelsea Sexton was available to come and give not only the intro to the movie, but also a little discussion afterwards. So it was very exciting. And she was one of the GM assembly line workers who was fired when GM decided to squish and crush every single EV1 that was licensed and leased to the customers. They pre-arranged this entire conspiracy to prevent people from buying the car. So there's literally only one EV1 in a museum somewhere that's still left in the world. But it almost caused the bankruptcy of GM as a result, as many people might know. They literally had to be bailed out because they guessed wrong that their main interest should have been fossil fuel generators or users, as our gasoline guzzlers could be called. And here's our second Integrity Research Award given to Dr. George Miley, who we're very happy to do so because he really was and still is one of the world's experts in fusion. So it was a pleasure to have him, and I convinced him to write a book on his experience, which he did, and got published by a very reputable publisher. Well, the proceedings turned out to be a 200-page book, and some of the sample videos were also produced. Dr. Pinto gave a remarkable presentation on the quantum vacuum, zero-point energy, and Casimir effects. And as I mentioned, John Thomas also did a presentation on the Searle device. Well, Dr. Pinto's expertise is in the quantum vacuum, and what he gave as an example, among many others, is the effect of two boats that are close to each other in say, ocean water. And it turns out that the waves in between the two boats are less in amplitude and less in frequency distribution than the ones outside the boats. And so it turns out, as he said, anyone who has a boat knows that you can't get too close to another boat because they will eventually collide. And this is exactly what the Casimir force is all about. Excuse me. So what we've did in 2006 also was take advantage of Jim Hanson's published graph of the 400,000 year history of the Earth And then I produced this type of graph, which I updated now, since we're up to 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And also come up with an equation. 20 parts per million of CO2 equals 1 degree increase that we're indebted for, and also sea level rise. So this was presented in hard copy form to every single attendee in 2006 at COFE2. Well, as you may guess, as I'm going through all the different 12 COFEs that we had, there is a way for you to take advantage of the content, which in many cases can seem overwhelming to people. And this is a flash drive, a 16 gigabyte flash drive that we now are marketing this week for IRI members, but also will be available through Tesla Tech. So Steve will be selling these flash drives as well. And they contain everything I'm describing in this slideshow today, as well as much more, videos, audios, and links to the online proceedings as well. So in 2009, where we're still talking about the COFE series, this was COFE3 that we also hosted. And what I found fascinating is that as I had been promoting for the past 10 years, a decade of future energy conferences, all of a sudden in 2009, there were tons of them around the world. Abu Dhabi, Huntsville, Spain, Washington, D.C., of course. So I sort of have to take a little bit of credit, perhaps, for inspiring other places around the world to look at future energy. And also in 2009, we see the climate predictions start to get updated, and it reflects what Jim Hansen was already predicting from his graph, showing that as you increase CO2 so significantly, the equation points to the fact that we're going to have about a 6 degree at least increase, 4 degrees C at the minimum by the end of our century. So as the third conference was organized and actually held at the hotel, Hilton Washington Hotel, we were pleased to also have Dr. Ray Sedgwick from the University of Maryland, from the Aerospace Engineering Department, and also the aerospace engineer David Froning, who I helped produce a book on his advances for propulsion and speed of exceeding the speed of light. And ESCO was also an expert in unusual experiments. He called the Quantum Rabbit Company for producing nuclear reactions that seem to be emerging cold fusion type of device. But also Dr. James Bear, it turns out he patented a replication of the Rife technology, where frequencies were identified in his patent that specifically were able to kill different pathogens. And they matched, and he explains in the patent why the frequencies were so deadly to those pathogens. So Rife was really onto something, and Dr. Bear was able to quantify it very nicely. And also Dave Goodwin was also a presenter at this third conference, who I'll mention in a second, and Dr. Ludwig as well, and of course Dr. Panton presented on bioenergy devices. So we also had another 200-page book. This is a picture of the cover of it, 8.5 by 11 soft cover, which we still have some copies available on our website and available to be delivered. But we also included in this flash drive some of the papers as well as some of the sample video. David Froning talking about quantum vacuum engineering for light speed space travel. And it's interesting how physical and rigorous his derivation of this ability to warp space-time based on the toroidal fields. He calls it SU3, SU2 and SU3 fields that you can create using specially engineered toroids. And also Dr. Eric Lerner, I don't think he's a PhD, was and still is an expert in PV11, which is proton boron fusion setup. that just uses a high voltage discharge to create a fusion effect. So this was a very exciting presentation. We also had the first ever zero-point energy panel of experts. So I give some credit to all the participants in that particular panel discussion on zero-point energy. And as we move on to COFE 4, which is in 2011, we were happy to collaborate with the, it was an institute that Glenn Robertson from NASA formed to host a conference on space, propulsion, and energy sciences. We called it an international forum. Well, his interest was the same as mine and ours in IRI, space, energy, and propulsion. So we collaborated, and he was able to find 77 presenters between our presenters and his that comprised parallel sessions for several days from the 15th to the 17th, which was quite exciting to have that size of a conference. And he also had the relationship with the Science Direct people for Physics Procedia. And this is actually online. It's available for access, open access. And each of us had to invest $2,000 in the cost of being available for open access to the public. So we did this for COFE 4 and for COFE 5. And this is quite remarkable because of the quality of the papers. For example, Dr. John Brandenburg described, maybe for one of the first times, how EM fields can modify gravity. And this is something he calls the GEM theory, which he's presented several times, and even on APEC as well. It's run by another website. But the interesting thing is even Dr. Bushnell's presentation, what I thought is probably still viable today in regards to saltwater agriculture. He made the case for the fact that there are plants and plants that are used for food that are actually amenable to having salt water. So the idea of using a fresh water for irrigation may not be as necessary in the future if people pay attention to the research he's already done. Now, Norm Healy was also a presenter later on in one of the following conferences, but Scott Kelsey was a PhD student at the time with Dr. Shealy, and Shealy was his PhD advisor. And it turns out that with my help, Dr. Shealy was able to create the Tesla coil therapy bed that he proved creates telomere elongation. And this to me was quite remarkable because it implies that you can extend your lifespan by giving yourself a little 15-minute or maybe 5 or 10-minute exposure to high voltage once a day. And there were other nice things that are also included. NASA papers and even some MP4, as you can see, all the MP4 videos, they were able to squeeze onto that flash drive as well. So SPCF became a very notable gravity, I would say, magnet for all of these different societies to contribute to the presentations at the conference. We even did a special magazine to summarize some of the best papers that were presented, and then followed through with the University of Maryland next year as well. The 2011 SPCF, which we just described to you, is also on the website, sciencedirect.com, and you just search under 2011 SPCF or even 2012 SPCF. And these are some of the density, I would say the density of scholarly papers that were presented. Gravitometric papers, dark matter, and then of course our COFE papers too, on water electrolysis and low energy nuclear reactions. So we had a lot of very interesting papers that even today are still, I would say, quite viable. So as we moved on to the next year, Glenn Robertson withdrew from being the chairperson, and so I took on the role, and he coached me on all the details of making sure our proceedings would be approved by the Science Direct and Presidia editors. So we also then collaborated to produce another set of proceedings as well as the papers that are included on this flash drive. So some of the, Dr. Paul LaViolette, for example, was also presenting on subquantum kinetics, and he also produced another paper as well on some of the astronomical predictions of the superwave coming from the galactic core. Now, one of the interesting papers and video that's included on this drive is Dr. Herb Modell's presentation on zero-point energy emissions from a cosmic cavity. And to me, I thought this was quite remarkable, so I'm presenting here a slide summarizing what that paper is about. It's a test of zero-point energy emissions from gases flowing through cosmic cavities. And these cosmic cavities are micron in size. So, in fact, it's 0.1 microns to be exact. And this is, to me, very difficult to engineer, for example, but also the frequency distributions that he received for all the different gases that he sent into the cavity were surprising to him, but also confirming that the gases had gained some energy passing through such a tiny cavity. And you can see the diagram how they did. So it's certainly encouraging for further research. Dr. Modell's very cautious about saying that he's proved zero-point energy can be used, but certainly the title that's given by his PhD student was very provocative as well in that regard. Now at COFE 3, we also need to give credit to David Goodwin. It turns out that as we gave the Integrity and Research Award to David Goodwin, it also was mainly because Dave confided in me that he had received an application for a grant years before, 16 years before to be exact. And Saul Perlmutter from Lawrence Berkeley Labs was applying back then for a grant to study supernovae. And Dave sent it off for peer review. He basically found that it was being rejected by his peers at the Department of Energy. And he should have, as the director of this chief administrator for the DOE grant, he should have followed through and refused to fund Dr. Perlmutter. Well, it turns out he didn't. He used his conscience and decided that maybe there's some value to the application that Dr. Perlmutter had applied for. And it certainly was true because in 2011, the PhD was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the universe is not only expanding, which we already knew, but it's accelerating in its expansion. This became a cover story for Time magazine and everywhere throughout the world as a result. And nobody knows except for me and a few other minor people that have heard about this, that really credit is due to Dave Goodwin's conscience to recognize the value in some of these grants that, in this case, resulted for a Nobel Prize as a result. So as we go on to COFE 6, we see that the Natural Philosophy Alliance was now the collaborator since Glenn Robertson disbanded the SPECIF operation. But similar themes were shared in both the Natural Philosophy Alliance and also the Institute. And so we moved on to the space propulsion, energy, gravity waves, and so forth. And COFE 6 was also just as seminal and interesting and viable as some of the previous conferences. Here, Dr. Miley finally finished his book, Life at the Center of the Energy Crisis, got it published. And I presented a summary of the PAP engine, which provoked Brian Wood to actually use it as a progress or a project in his company and form a research project following up on this interesting noble gas engine. And also, what was interesting too is Dr. Simos from the National Lab was also talking about Tesla's wireless energy. And also, we had a cavitation fusion presentation, as well as what I found fascinating, the attempt to replicate and understand Edward Leescalion's coral castle device, which, as we know, includes 10 tons or higher stones that were put in place just by himself, which is also very intriguing. So here's some of the summaries of the slideshow from Dr. Simos. One of the successful replications of the PAP engine by Russ Reese, and also some of the video presentations from Dr. Simos's talk, as well as Dr. Modell's 0.8 energy emissions from casual cavity. And so here we see the 450-page proceedings that have evolved from this COFE 7, which was now finally held in Albuquerque, New Mexico, thanks to Steve's Tesla Tech Extraordinary Technology Conference. And we covered lots of different fields: inertial propulsion, Casimir pulse magnetics, and so forth. Well, what I didn't tell you is that Mike Gamble was at one of the thesis in 2012, COFE 5, as a matter of fact. And I convinced him to show me a photograph of what he had said he worked on at Boeing. Well, it turns out the photograph he's holding is of a room-sized scissoring gyroscope, actually two gyros that are scissoring as they're held in one place by one end and then allowed to move back and forth on the other end. So he copied, in a way, the KID patent, which is shown up here above, which I actually saw in Switzerland being used by Mr. KID. And also the fact that Mike was the chief engineer working on Boeing's large-scale model of that. And he worked on it for years. So I asked him if he would consider developing a tabletop model, which he did. It only took a couple of years for him to do that. And then, with a little bit of IRI support, he presented it at COFE 7 in 2015. And then once again in 2020, he showed the running, the cart actually moves quite rapidly across the tabletop. And so COFE 7 has a bunch of very interesting speakers, including the Mike Campbell presentation. I received a Casimir cavity presentation from a PhD student from Portugal, which is included in this. We also have Dr. Panting's presentation on pulse magnetic fields, and Dr. Simos's, and also I did a couple of them on breakthrough energy spiral magnetic motors, and also the PAP engine Ryan Wood talked about as well. Well, here's a single slide from Dr. Simos's presentation, and it shows the sphere of the Earth, excuse me, the Earth's ionosphere cavity, and the fact that the Earth's surface is also part of the presentation or the communication conductive medium for this ability to transmit power. And as we move on to COFE 8, COFE 8 also was in Albuquerque, as most of the rest of them. A couple more were presented there. And we had Dr. Shealy presenting also on his advice for health and longevity, which was quite remarkable. And Linda Moulton Howe also presented her biography, literally autobiography, of all the research that she'd done with UFOs, and also some of the other presenters that you might recognize. Here's Linda with a packed house, talking about her account of electrolytics with the laminated artifact that she had received anonymously, which turns out has layers of bismuth and magnesium that can't still be replicated on Earth today. Well, I also talked about the analysis of electrographitics that I presented a few years before, and then updated for the conference as we developed a propulsion program that I also described briefly on Ancient Aliens in 2011. And this is the collage of the two electrographitics books that we produced. And I was fortunate enough to have, for a while, Dr. LaViolette's assessment of the B-2 bomber using the charge separation as a means for propulsion, much as T.T. Brown did. But also I was able to include the late Mark McCandlish's analysis of a hovercraft. This is his drawing of the hovercraft that was shown at Norton Air Force Base in 1988. And this is investigated by Hal Puthoff and also seen by eyewitnesses, including the congressman. And so it's fascinating that pulsed electromagnetics can also be a motivational or propulsional force. And that's what this demonstration seems to show. In other words, electrographitics. So as we proceed to COFE 9, we basically had even Glenn Robertson talking about his research, as well as some of the local professor, Condon, and also a Searle presentation. Glenn Gordon also presented. And we had a special presentation by Dr. McMakin on the frequency-specific therapy that she had developed with microcurrents. Here's a sample video from Dr. Glenn Ryan that's included in the video in the flash drive, and a view of what the exhibit rooms hold. In COFE 10, as we're finishing up on the content of the slide of the flash drive, COFE 10 included a 600-page proceedings, which is also, it was remarkable that it was that many pages, but also this particular picture or photo shows the presentation from this director of Alaska's Center for Energy and Power as a model of sustainable technology. I was so pleased to get her to come all the way from Alaska to New Mexico to give this presentation on all the different ways that they self-sustain their energy supply in the cold, wintry area of Alaska. And that's included in the presentation in the flash drive as well. And here's a list of all the designers. I also give you a little bit of credit to exhibitors. This particular exhibitor was an expert at Garliv's wave genetics, using a laser to specifically shine light through young cells in order to make old cells younger. COFE 11 was also held in Albuquerque as the last one we held there. It also included Dr. Bruce Cornett's presentation, as well as Dr. LaViolette's presentation as newcomers to the conference, and Paul Murad's replication of the Searle device. So we include an MP video segment of Dr. Paul Murad's presentation on the findings that he achieved through the Searle device he built, and also my presentation on breakthrough energy. Now, Bruce Cornett's presentation was very unique now that UFOs are becoming more mainstream and able to be talked about even from the military point of view. Here we see that Cornett can be called one of the world's experts. Well, I convinced him to write a book on this subject before the conference, which he did publish on Kindle Direct Publishing. It's available on Amazon. And here we see some of the right angle turns that he photographed, which I also included in one of my slides years ago, showing the red and blue, red and green blinking lights, making it look like it's a conventional aircraft, but the right angle turn gives it away as something unconventional. And inertial shielding is really what we're witnessing in this regard, and that's something that hopefully we'll be able to develop soon, so we can actually achieve similar types of acceleration and mobility. Now, the cover of Unconventional Area Phenomena is Bruce Burnett's new book, and it also includes a picture of a UFO traveling at so fast, several Mach speeds, which he photographed in daylight hours in the Hudson Valley. And then the last conference I'm talking about is COFE 12, and we were able to hold that during COVID on the internet through using Zoom. I had all the conference speakers lined up, so I thought, gee, let's see if we can do this online, which we did. And so all the different presenters, including the colonel from the Air Force Research Lab, actually in New Mexico, was specifically one of our presenters. And he was talking about the space power, space energy accumulation and microwave beaming of electrical power to the Earth. It turns out in space there's 10 times the solar energy as there is on the Earth, even in the most solar amenable areas. And Colonel Felt's presentation, I felt, was quite remarkable in the fact that he was able to publicly disclose all the research they were doing. And Dr. Radin's presentation was also remarkable in the fact that he was talking about all the different psychic research that they have achieved, even through double-blind studies. So the bioenergy and bioenergetics interest that we have, the public seemed to share, and we were able to receive a very good quality presentation from Dr. Radin, which shows in his slides, this is a sample of one of the slides, that unusual effects can be shown through plants and various other media that we use. And this is a series of different titles that we included videos of on the flash drive. It's amazing what MP4 videos can be compressed to. Even Dr. Vancourt's presentation on light affecting gravity was certainly an eye-opener. And I was able to include a climate presentation since I published several journal articles on climate change and the forecasts and roadmap to solving climate change through gigaton global carbon dioxide capture. And then I also was able in COFE 12 to propose the possibility of a university level textbook on ufology. And these are the sample chapters that I'm actually looking forward to collaborating with a co-author on, who's also a UFO expert. So we should soon see this textbook in print and hopefully starting to be used in universities. Well, on that topic, I've also included the story of my involvement and following with George Van Tassel ever since, I would say, 50 years ago, 60, about 40 years ago. Sir George Van Tassel was famous for not only building a wooden structure, a hemispherical structure, as you see here, called the Integratron, but also designing it so that it could hold and retain high voltage from the atmosphere, which is what all these thyroid extensions are supposed to do. And so for the Ancient Aliens presentation, which I was able to do, I also built a model of what I felt could be the completion of the project. And it's essentially the kind of miniature Minkowski multi-wave oscillator that seems to be present. There I am standing in front of the Integratron. When you see it up close, you can tell that it's not really a Tesla coil wave that all of these different wires are creating, but also instead a Minkowski type of antenna where there are breaks in the wires, and each one is at a different voltage. So Van Tassel was famous for holding the largest UFO conferences ever held. Even back in the 1960s, nobody ever assembled 20,000 people in one place, and yet he did. And he wrote several books about the UFO contacts that he had. Well, what I found fascinating, and you can see some of this at integratron.com, is that he also provoked me to pursue my research in the physics department of State University of New York at Buffalo, where thanks to Van Tassel and his follower, Norman Paulson, whose book, Sunburst Return of the Ancients, included a photo that he took at Giant Rock during one of the UFO conferences. Well, as you can see, there's something strange hovering above the conference, and here's the deputy sheriff who took the photo, and he had an Instamatic camera that also printed the photo. So he's holding the actual photo you see on the left, and also he's being given credit for the fact that he took the photo. So the legitimacy and the veracity of this event, and also the content, really provoked me to pursue the organization, which was a Sunburst community, and also contact Norman Paulson to get an idea of what type of energy generator was present on this craft that he claims to have been able to get access to. So there's my book, Homo Polar Handbook, that has a summary of the research I did for my master's degree in physics. And I was pleased to be able to propose a project to my professor rather than having him propose the project to me. So it gave me a sense of self-esteem and also more of a feeling of being able to direct my own research. And I guess that's the blessing that I received for having this opportunity to bring a UFO topic back to a standard university and test it in the laboratory. This is an inset showing the 8-inch circular magnets that I used to test the homopolar generator, which apparently was something similar to what the Norman Paulson device was on the craft that he saw. But even to this day, it seemed like it was maybe a serial device, perhaps, with magnets around the outer edge, but it still remains a mystery. So I pursued lots of other magnetic motors, including spiral motors, which seem to have a very high advantage. 90% of it is being powered from the magnets. And all we need to do is overcome the transition point, commutation point that is at the end of every spiral. And we have lots of things I published in the journal article describing the methods that we can possibly use. And we're pursuing that with different fundraising grants and engineering projects with a magnetorestrictive and piezoelectric device. Well, this is based on magnetic field gradients. And it turns out a magnetic field gradient is a power source. And that's what's exciting about it. And it's also being used in the Stern-Gerlach experiment to separate directions of spin for, I believe, protons that were sent through the magnets. And the inhomogeneous magnetic field is really the secret of creating the gradient. In other words, a changing magnetic field. And this is seen in the Hartman patent 4215330, which you can build and try, and I've already done this. Remarkably, it propels a ball bearing up to a 10-degree incline. Well, the bioenergetics program, which is what the Integratron was really designed for, and there you see a Minkowski type of antenna with little breaks in every ring that are not connected, but they're assembled spatially around each other. And that's something we've also been pursuing and building, and it's on the cover of my bioelectromagnetic healing book. So you can read more about the advantages of boosting your transmembrane potential, for example, by the exposure to high voltage, and also electrons are antioxidants, so that is a benefit of any pulsed, like the impulsor exposure, as well as high voltage exposure. So there are healthy reasons for considering various devices that are out there for high voltage electrotherapy. So the key that we're talking about, which is the flash drive 16 gigabytes, is available through Tesla Tech, as well as on our website on bioenergydevice.org. And you'll see it listed as a device that's available this week, actually, ready to ship. And it's really worth a couple $1,000s when you consider all the DVDs we sold that are on there for $20 each. The proceedings, $40 each. You can just keep going through the conferences one by one all the way up to 12, and we've included lots of extra stuff too at the end. So instead of a list price of $150, it's only $95. So we're happy to describe the benefits of all this research that's been done, and certainly I apologize for anybody that's left out who participated in these conferences on future energy, but at least I gave you the highlights of what you can read about and see and listen to on the flash drive that's available. Thank you for your attention, and if anybody has any questions, I think maybe Steve can direct them.
Well, thank you, Tom. A great presentation there. Brought back a lot of memories. You know,
Yeah,
a lot
you
of.
were at the first COFE, right? COFE 1 in Bethesda, Maryland.
Yeah, so I think people should consider coming to conferences because that's where you meet people, and then when you see things like this, it jogs your memory, and the written material provides you a lot of detail that you probably miss when you're watching it. So it kind of all combines itself, and I'd like anyone who has any questions to go ahead and submit them in the comments, and we'll see how many we can field here. I'm looking forward to this year. Are you planning to ever do another in-person conference, or are you going to stick primarily with the video?
Well, it turns out that Zoom is so convenient that I'm following Zoom conferences all the time and participating in them. So I find it more convenient than to spend several days traveling there and back and so forth, and the expenditure. For example, COFE 2 literally cost us $10,000. And luckily, since I had a back pay from the Fed office, we were able to fend that off and pay for it, even though normally that would push an institute like ours into bankruptcy, perhaps. So you take a risk, as you know, whenever you try to fund a conference that may or may not be successful with the attendance.
Well, I know that's my biggest nightmare. It's not getting enough people there.
Tell me about it.
But anytime I can walk away with a conference with the bills paid, I consider that success. That and the fact that when everybody walks away with a smile on their face, they had a great time, they learned a lot, and that's, to me, is the measure of success. And I can't encourage people to come to these conferences enough. No telling what's going to happen. This year we had Malcolm Bendo show up out of nowhere, and were able to do a live stream on that. But for the most part, he could have been there and been part of actually building the motor and everything. Who knows? Because he built that right there on the spot. Okay, here you go. Did you ever add the PZT to the spiral motor? And I presume that's what it is.
Yep, we did it, and I blew up a $1,000 PZT already. So my next goal is to do a fundraiser to allow this to point magnetic fields into our experimental device and actually have a pulse magnetic field come out of it with the magnetostrictive and piezoelectric combined into a vice. But it's very expensive, and that's the problem that we're facing is how do you fund this type of research on a low budget? But we're interested in now a $10,000 budget for the next stage of this research, and Hathaway Labs in Toronto is willing to do the next stage because they're the ones that built it. George Hathaway built that out of stainless steel, so he's really an expert in this. And do you ever think we'll see the type of alternative energy devices released to the public? And then everybody started to lose hope, I'll tell you, from the 1980s when I started, because my original homopolar handbook was based on a trip to Sunburst Labs and Sunburst Community in 1980. So I've been at it for 43 years now. And of course, you go through that stage where you lose hope and you think, well, nobody's interested in renewable energy. And even further, free energy is a no-no, as I learned the hard way. It's still today years, decades later, is still something that people debate about and dismiss as being impossible. However, I have to reassure the person who asked this question that free energy is available today, and we have, for example, Dr. Modell's research proving that you can actually extract some type of energy, which we should call zero-point energy, from a cosmic cavity. And also the University of Arkansas, which is Paul Sabato is a professor there that has also done some remarkable work with graphene oscillations. Graphene oscillates continually, and he was able to transfer and transduce that into an electrical output. So these professors that have discovered and proven and developed free energy in the laboratories oftentimes face backlash themselves. And it's interesting to me whenever I see their journal articles that they actually cover the second law of thermodynamics very cagily and describe how, like in Sabato's case, oh, well, we're rectifying in both directions, so therefore there's no particular way that we're unidirectionally bringing energy out of the vacuum. So I find that interesting that the play on words for obfuscating the physics behind the second law. But there's certainly many people who are close to producing a commercial device that won't need any fuel whatsoever.
Well, I think a lot of the ideas are kind of stolen, and you may not see an entire device, but you see bits and parts of them all of a sudden appear out of nowhere in commercial use.
Mhm.
Here's
And PAP engine's another good example too. Triple degree engineer can't get funding for development. Yeah, and it depends on what Miller device you're talking about. I think I met you in Switzerland, Carmen. But it's nice that you're still pursuing his magnetic motor. So hopefully we'll get that to an independent lab and verify its production.
well, I believe in this energy thing, and I just hope the world survives it long enough to bring some of this stuff back.
Yep, that's the challenge we have today.
So. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and call it a night. It's getting
Okay.
kind of late, and
I'll be able to few questions.
and I'll be putting your order sheet up online there, and either I'll take, or I might have a link to your site. I'll figure it out tomorrow.
Yeah,
But-
I'll send you the link. Sure.
So anyway, I'll talk to you next week, hopefully, and you have a good thing. And thank you again for being on, and thank everyone for coming. And don't forget, we have a conference coming up, and I'd like everyone who can to get signed up. It really helps us when you sign up early. And right now I'm giving people 40% off to get up there and get signed up. So thank you. And we'll have a show next week. I believe it's going to be Karen Elkins, and then on Christmas Eve and New Year's. I don't know yet. I just might be. I just might have an open mic. I'm not sure yet. And I'm also going to start putting up the 1999 videos from Global Science up tonight. Anyway, you all have a great day, and we'll see you hopefully next week. Thank you. And thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Steve.